What if the Ottoman Empire wasn't first conquered with armies, but with money? For centuries, European powers wanted Ottoman territory. But before borders were redrawn, before armies marched into Ottoman lands, and before provinces began disappearing from the map, European financial power had already entered the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman state controlled enormous trade routes connecting Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Istanbul was a center of commerce. Its ports were crowded with ships. Its markets attracted merchants from across the world. Taxes, customs duties, and trade generated enormous revenue for the imperial government. But during the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire faced increasingly expensive wars and growing pressure to modernize. The government needed money, and Europe had plenty of it. So the Ottoman state began borrowing from European lenders. At first, these loans seemed like a lifeline. They could finance railways. They could modernize the military. They could keep the government functioning. But there was a problem. Borrowed money always comes with obligations. And the Ottoman Empire was taking on more debt than its economy could comfortably support. Year after year, loans accumulated. Interest had to be paid. New borrowing was sometimes needed to cover old obligations. And slowly, something changed. The Ottoman Empire was no longer dealing with European powers only on the battlefield. It was now dealing with them through banks and financial contracts. And eventually, those contracts would give foreign creditors unprecedented influence over Ottoman finances. The empire still had its army. It still had its sultan. It still controlled enormous territories. But behind the walls of its palaces, the treasury was becoming increasingly vulnerable. At first, the foreign loans seemed manageable. The Ottoman government borrowed money to pay for wars, modernize its military, build railways, and keep the state running. But the problem wasn't borrowing. The problem was how quickly the debt grew. Ottoman finances were under enormous pressure. Military expenses were rising. Government revenues were unstable. And the empire was losing valuable territories, which meant losing taxpayers and sources of income. Then came a devastating moment. In 1875, the Ottoman government announced that it could no longer fully meet its debt payments. The empire was effectively in financial crisis. For European creditors, this was more than bad news. It was an opportunity. In 1881, the Ottoman government accepted the creation of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration. This organization gave foreign creditors control over the collection of certain Ottoman revenues. Taxes and duties from products such as tobacco, salt, alcohol, and other sources could now be directed towards servicing the empire's debts. Think about what that meant. The Ottoman government still existed. The Sultan was still on the throne. The Ottoman flag still flew over the capital. But part of the empire's income was now being collected under an international financial system designed primarily to repay its creditors. The battlefield had changed. Europe didn't need to occupy every Ottoman city to gain influence over Ottoman money. Financial control could accomplish something similar, without firing a shot. The creation of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration marked a major change. European creditors were no longer simply waiting for Ottoman payments. They now had a mechanism through which specific Ottoman revenues could be collected and directed toward the debt. For the Ottoman government, this meant losing part of its financial freedom. But money was not the only thing changing. European companies were also becoming increasingly involved in the Ottoman economy. Railways were built with foreign investment. European banks expanded their influence. Foreign businesses gained commercial privileges. Ports and trade networks became increasingly connected to European markets. And slowly, the Ottoman economy became tied to the financial systems of Europe. This did not mean that Europe simply walked into Istanbul and took the entire Ottoman treasury. The reality was more complicated. Ottoman officials continued to govern. Ottoman taxes continued to exist. But an increasing share of the empire's economic resources was connected to foreign creditors, investors, and companies. And that created a dangerous imbalance. The Ottoman Empire needed European capital, while European financial interests increasingly depended on Ottoman revenues. The relationship was becoming difficult to escape. Then another crisis arrived. The empire began losing more territory, and every lost province meant more than a smaller map. It could also mean less revenue to pay the debts. The financial problem became even worse when the Ottoman Empire began losing territory. Throughout the 19th century, Ottoman lands were gradually being lost through wars, nationalist movements, and political pressure from rival powers. Every province that disappeared created another problem. Less land meant fewer taxpayers. Fewer taxpayers meant less government revenue. And less revenue made it harder to repay the enormous debts that were already hanging over the empire. It became a vicious cycle. The government needed more money to defend its remaining territories. But military spending increased the financial pressure. The empire borrowed more. Debt increased. And foreign financial influence became even stronger. At the same time, European powers were becoming increasingly interested in Ottoman resources and strategic locations. The Ottoman Empire still controlled important ports, agricultural regions, trade routes, and access between Europe and Asia. So the question was no longer simply, who controls Ottoman territory? It was becoming, who controls the economic resources connected to that territory? This is why the decline of the Ottoman Empire cannot be explained only through military defeats. Behind the changing borders was a much larger economic struggle. And as the 19th century came to an end, European powers had gained something extremely valuable: deep economic influence inside an empire they had not yet completely conquered. By the early 20th century, the Ottoman Empire was still sovereign, but its financial independence had been seriously weakened. The Ottoman Public Debt Administration continued collecting designated revenues to repay foreign creditors. European financial institutions had gained a position inside the empire that would have been difficult to imagine only a few decades earlier. But there was an important distinction. Europe had not simply stolen the entire Ottoman treasury. The reality was more complicated, and in some ways, more powerful. Foreign creditors had obtained legally recognized claims over specific Ottoman revenues. That meant Ottoman money could be redirected toward debt payments before the government could freely use all of it for its own priorities. And this was happening while the empire was struggling with wars, territorial losses, and rising political tensions. The Ottoman government still controlled enormous resources, but its room to maneuver was shrinking. Then came the First World War. The empire entered the conflict alongside Germany and its allies. The war would bring enormous destruction, and when it ended in 1918, the Ottoman Empire was on the losing side. Now the political future of its territories and its remaining financial resources would be decided by victorious powers. The empire that had once negotiated with Europe as an equal was now facing the consequences of decades of military defeats, economic dependence, and war. The final struggle over the Ottoman Empire had begun. 1918. The Ottoman Empire had lost the First World War. The consequences were enormous. Foreign forces occupied important Ottoman territories, while the victorious powers began discussing how the remaining empire should be divided and reorganized. The Ottoman government was now in an extremely weak position. For centuries, the empire had controlled its own territory, collected its own taxes, and managed its own finances. Now foreign powers had enormous influence over what would happen next. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed in 1920, proposed a dramatic reduction of Ottoman territory and placed major restrictions on what remained of the Ottoman state. But the treaty was never fully implemented. A nationalist movement led by Mustafa Kemal challenged the old Ottoman government and fought for a new Turkish state. The struggle eventually transformed the entire political landscape. In 1922, the Ottoman Sultanate was abolished. The empire had effectively come to an end, but the financial story did not disappear with it. The new Turkish Republic inherited a complicated financial legacy, including Ottoman debts and international financial obligations. So the Ottoman treasury had not simply vanished. Its revenues, debts, assets, and financial agreements had become part of a much larger settlement between the collapsing empire, its successor states, and foreign creditors. The empire was gone, but its financial legacy would survive for decades. By the final years of the Ottoman Empire, the struggle over its wealth was no longer just about gold and silver sitting inside a treasury. The real prize was much larger. It was control over revenue, trade, resources, ports, and economic routes. European powers wanted access to Ottoman markets and strategic waterways. Railways connected important regions to ports, while foreign companies became involved in areas such as transportation, banking, mining, and trade. This created a complicated economic relationship. The Ottoman government still existed, but foreign capital had become deeply connected to the empire's economy. And after the First World War, the situation became even more complicated. The Ottoman Empire was dismantled, while new states emerged from its former territories. The financial obligations of the old empire did not simply disappear. They had to be divided and negotiated. Turkey inherited a significant portion of the Ottoman debt, and payments continued for years after the empire itself was gone. So when we talk about Europe taking Ottoman wealth, the reality is not a simple story of someone walking into a palace and carrying away a treasure chest. It was something more complicated. Loans, debt, foreign investment, revenue collection, and ultimately, economic influence. The Ottoman Empire was losing control of its finances long before it completely disappeared from the map. By the early 1920s, the Ottoman Empire that had once dominated 3 continents was disappearing. Its territories had been reduced. Its finances were heavily burdened by debt, and its political authority was collapsing. The abolition of the Sultanate in 1922 ended the Ottoman state as an empire. But the financial consequences continued. The new Turkish Republic had to deal with the Ottoman Empire's remaining debts and international financial agreements. Negotiations continued over how much of the old debt Turkey would assume and how the obligations would be divided among successor states. This is an important part of the story because it shows that an empire can disappear politically while its financial commitments survive. The Ottoman Empire had spent decades borrowing from European lenders. European companies had invested heavily in Ottoman infrastructure and commerce. Foreign creditors had obtained claims over specific revenues. And by the time the empire collapsed, European financial influence had become deeply embedded in the Ottoman economy. So the Ottoman Empire was not simply defeated on battlefields. Its decline was also shaped by economic dependence. And that is perhaps the most important lesson from its financial history. An empire doesn't have to lose everything in one battle. Sometimes control disappears gradually, one loan at a time, one contract at a time, one revenue stream at a time. And by the time the final borders are drawn, much of the economic struggle has already been decided. When the Ottoman Empire finally disappeared, one question remained. What happened to all the wealth that had accumulated for centuries? The answer is not as simple as people often imagine. Some royal possessions remained in Turkey. Some assets were transferred to the new Turkish state. Some debts were inherited. Some properties and financial interests were divided among successor states. And some wealth had already left the empire long before its final collapse. The Ottoman treasury had never been one single mountain of gold waiting to be captured. It was a complex financial system connected to taxation, land, trade, customs duties, state-owned resources, and international borrowing. And this is where the story becomes particularly interesting. European powers did not necessarily need to physically seize every Ottoman asset. In many cases, financial agreements had already created mechanisms through which money could be redirected toward creditors. Revenue that once supported the Ottoman government could be committed to debt payments. Customs income could become part of international financial arrangements. and economic concessions could give foreign companies long-term access to Ottoman resources and markets. So the real transformation was not simply Ottoman wealth disappearing into European vaults. It was the gradual transformation of who controlled the flow of money. For centuries, the Ottoman state had controlled major trade routes between Europe and Asia. But as global trade changed, European powers developed alternative routes, stronger financial institutions, larger industrial economies, and increasingly powerful commercial networks. The Ottoman Empire was still rich in resources and strategically important, but its ability to control those resources was weakening. And by the final decades of the empire, the question was no longer simply, how much wealth did the Ottomans have? The more important question had become, who had the power to decide where that wealth went? That was the deeper financial struggle. The Ottoman Empire did not collapse because one European power suddenly discovered a hidden treasury and took it away. The reality was far more complicated. For decades, the empire had been struggling with military expenses, declining revenues, foreign competition, internal instability, and enormous financial obligations. Loans were taken to survive. New loans were sometimes used to repay old ones. Foreign creditors gained greater influence. And eventually, parts of the empire's revenue system came under international financial supervision. By the time the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed, its economic independence had already been severely weakened. Its political borders were still visible on maps. Its sultans still ruled from Istanbul. Its armies still existed. Its government still collected taxes. But behind the scenes, the financial foundations of the empire had been changing for decades. And this is what makes the story of the Ottoman treasury so important. Because history is often told through battles, armies, kings, conquests, and the dramatic fall of cities. But empires can also be weakened through something much quieter. Money. A loan can create dependence. A contract can transfer control. A concession can give foreign companies access to valuable resources. And a debt can turn a powerful government into a debtor negotiating with its creditors. The Ottoman Empire once controlled territory stretching across Europe, Asia, and Africa. But its financial independence gradually disappeared. And when the empire finally ended after the First World War, the process was almost complete. The Ottoman lands were divided. The old political order disappeared. The debts remained. The financial agreements remained. And the economic consequences continued into the new era. So perhaps the most accurate way to describe the story is not that Europe simply stole the Ottoman treasury. It is that European financial power gradually gained influence over the Ottoman economy at a time when the empire was becoming increasingly dependent on foreign capital. And that distinction matters. Because the greatest prize was never just the gold inside a palace. The greatest prize was the ability to influence the flow of money itself. And once that control began to disappear, the empire's future was already changing. The Ottoman Empire did not lose its wealth in a single day. It lost financial control one decision at a time. And eventually, the empire itself disappeared,